Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Friday, January 17th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you with the fifth installment of our position preview series. Today, we go behind the plate and we break down catchers. And there's a lot to dissect here because a lot of leagues out there only require you to start one catcher. But the leagues we talk about a lot on this show, the leagues we play in, NFBC leagues, they all require us to start two catchers. So the strategy differences between the two leagues and oh, yeah, you got that down. You got that down. I thought your mic was broken at first, but no, that's the proper effect. We can have a little conversation about whether or not, one catcher leagues make more sense and dig into that a little bit in just a moment. Regardless of the number of catchers you have to start in your league, you can rank them in our Discord. Go to the Hive rankings channel. We'll have a post for catchers in there, a link to a forum where you can submit your own rankings, your agreements, your disagreements, your sleepers, all of that, all in one place. Getting lots of nice responses coming in for the first four positions so far. There's a pinned message at the top of the channel with all the links for all the positions so far. So if you missed one, you don't have to go scrolling back. Just go to the pinned spot in the Hive channel and you will find that. You can join our Discord using the link in the show description. All right, so you clearly don't like catchers. What's your beef with catchers?
I mean, it's the worst offensive position on the field, and you have to have two of them. Like we don't ask you to have two of anything else. I mean, you have five outfielders, yes, but there's three on the field, so I don't know. I don't like it.
But the argument I get from the generation of people who played fantasy baseball before us, basically people that either invented the game or at least helped popularize it or make it possible for us to have careers talking about it, they say it makes the game too easy by not having a second catcher. That's one of the core arguments. And I just think to myself, is that the biggest challenge of playing the game, is finding a good second catcher? And is that a challenge worth maintaining if it even is true? Like, I'm with you. I think the move is to say, if you're the commissioner, put it to the league, say, how about we do two utility spots instead of two catchers? Still the same number of hitters, or give you some flexibility, add an infield spot. You want to use a second catcher there? Great. Anybody in the infield works. Maybe there's a strategy angle that could work if you get two elite catchers and give yourself some buffer. Maybe that actually is a good idea in certain instances, right? I don't think two catchers is the right way to play, even though it is frequently discussed on this show.
Only angle that I kind of like about it is that it does add a wrinkle, and you don't, with any game. And I think the what fascinates me and hopefully our listeners with fantasy baseball is that there's a lot of different ways to win, and if there was only one way to win, it wouldn't be as exciting. That's frequently cited as a concern with the regular sport of baseball, with the actual sport, is that there's only sort of one way to win. And I think I'm happy when the Padres go aggressive on payroll, on free agency, and trade away all their prospects, because that's different. I'm happy when a team steals a ton of bags and just is the go-go team, I'm happy when the Rays do that. I'm happy when the Guardians are like, hey, we're all about contact over here, so like that's cool when that happens. And so at least having two catchers gives you, a couple wrinkles. Are you going to be the two elite guy? Are you going to be the sort of punt the position guy? Are you going to be the manager that, decides to have one of each, So I think there is a little bit of strategy that adds to the game. But generally, these aren't very good hitters. So you're not looking at very good hitters. And does it make it harder? I don't know. I mean, it would be like if you took them out, the average batting average across your team would be, closer to 260, 262 or something. So it'd still be hard. You'd have to figure out how to keep your batting average higher, if you didn't have catchers in there. So I don't know. It's at the same time, I have a perverse pleasure with, right now in my draft and hold, I'm looking at fourth second baseman and fourth catchers, and there's something fun about it because you're just deeper than most people are when they play this game.
Right. It's fun to be right It's fun to get playing time situations right or to get skills growth right, and at least having a second catcher or playing in draft and hold or mono leagues going to the very bottom of the pool. You're tapping out all of your resources, trying to find and see things that other people don't see. So in that sense, it's not the worst thing in the world. But I think as far as like how you'd structure it, if you were building the game from scratch today, probably one catcher replacing that second spot with UT or infielder. Not the end of the world if you don't, because we're going to cover a lot of them. And you say there are no good hitting catchers. How dare you, sir? William is a phenomenal hitting catcher. And I'm not just saying that because he's a Brewer. He was great even as a shared catching player in Atlanta, sharing that role a couple of years ago before the trade. He looked like a very special bat, and he's shown that in an everyday role. It's like 20 homers with a good average, great run production, just looks like the norm around here. Nearly 1,300 regular season plate appearances in the last 2 seasons combined. Part of the boost there, though, does come from the Brewers using him as a DH about every 5th game or so to keep the bat in the lineup, but to also rest his legs a little bit. So he's a high volume catcher who hits enough to be a DH on a team that will still probably afford him that option. They do have one of their top prospects, Jefferson Caro, who's down with a shoulder injury last year. He's healthy again, so maybe he works his way out of the depth chart and is that sort of highly touted backup that eventually takes some time away. But I don't really see a massive drop in playing time so long as William Contreras stays healthy. The skills really look solid, but what is tricky is that he is in a tier of his own by average draft position. We talked about some inflation that we see in the auction calculator, where the weight that the calculator puts on catchers is huge. It drives the dollar values up, and you have to be a little bit careful about drafting catchers too early if you take those dollars that it spits out at face value for the position. People are drafting William Contreras as a second rounder. That is a thing that's happening. Again, those are 2 catcher leagues where that's happening, but in that circumstance, how early are you drafting William Contreras? Are you anywhere near that ADP, or does he have to fall a full round or more before you start to think that it's a good idea to build a team with him in your foundation?
I mean, it's an amazing difference in the auction calculator. He is a $30 catcher. $30 players are top 15 bats overall, really top 13 by Oopsie. And, that's a real advantage when you're talking about, another way of saying it is that William Contreras, even if he wasn't a catcher, would still be worth a lot. It's not all in the position adjustment. In fact, if you take the position adjustment away, William Contreras would be worth $8. Willson Contreras would be worth $1. Salvador Perez would be worth $1. Yainer, Diaz, and Raleigh would be worth 50 cents. And every other catcher would not be worth $1. Or it wouldn't even be 0. Shea Langeliers is -5 if you took away his catcher designation.
I think you do have to adjust, though. Like every position is worth at least $8, I think, as far as what they give them. So instead of getting a $24 boost, they'd get an $8 boost. So you got to take $16 off if you're adjusting and saying, if Wilson Contreras were a shortstop, for example. Well, he doesn't steal a lot of bases compared to other shortstops, and there's a little bit less run production, a little less power. It would ding him pretty good.
That's true. There are position adjustments for everybody. That's true.
But he'd be $15 if he was a shortstop by the auction calculator.
Yeah. So, So, but that's still, a pretty good shortstop, and it's way far and above everybody else. And in terms of plate appearance projected, he's projected for 626. Willson is projected for 601 because he's actually the first baseman. Salvador Perez DHs, and he gets 611, and nobody else gets 600 plate appearances at the position. So this is a theme that we'll come back to. I do wonder, is it a Brewers situation where, they don't spend that much and they don't have a great offense? Is it, Christian Yelich being out last year? There were these 30 games that Wilson Contreras, or 35 games that William Contreras played DH. Will he play those same 35 games this year with Christian Yelich back, Jackson Chourio emerging? How much is Yelich going to play the outfield with Sal Frelick and Garrett Mitchell and Blake Perkins out there that are going to play better defense than him? So, as much as William Contreras gave us, all that goodness last year, I don't think he'll get back to 679 plate appearances, and there may be a concern at some point that this is a pretty robust workload for a young catcher, and he may drop back to sort of 600, high 500s. I don't know when that'll be, and if it's this year, and if they have the personnel to, say, oh, we have enough to rest our bat that's 30% better than league average and not play him at DH. But there could come a time where they decide to kind of do more load management with him.
Even with all the outfield depth the Brewers have had in recent years, you can take a look at 2024 and say, well, Yelich, for every 3 games he started, played 2 in the outfield. So I think coming off of surgery, they might be a little more careful with him initially. I don't think they want to move him to full-time DH. I think it leaves them more possibilities like this, gives them options to play a good defensive first baseman if they carry one on the roster this year, move Rhys Hoskins to DH. Like, they can do all sorts of little things with their roster. So that the long-term concern of any catcher maintaining this level of playing time is completely valid. I think he's got one more year where he can be maybe the leader at the position, health permitting. The furthest he's fallen in a draft in the NFBC the last 14 days is pick 30. So the use case here for me would be, okay, I had the first overall pick. It's a 15-team league. It's coming back to me at the end of round 2. He does happen to fall, and I'm not going to pick again.
I can add a pitcher to him anyway. I can just do the pitcher in the 3rd instead, or whatever. It doesn't matter right there.
Pick 30, 31, and then I got to wait all the way until the end.
And I'm going to miss every
4
other
and
elite catcher. There's no other way to get an elite catcher if you have the first or 2nd pick. There's no other way to get an elite catcher unless you get William Contreras there, because that's where the other guys that are, I think there's a hard tier that includes him, his brother, Salvador Perez, and Yainer Diaz.
I think you'd get a shot at all those guys at the 4-5 turn, but you have to decide if the premium's worth it. Is that extra $7 or $8 in value you're getting from William Contreras worth getting the extra boost at the position compared to your league mates? Maybe in that circumstance it is, but that's sort of an outlier sort of scenario to prepare yourself for. He doesn't always fall to pick 30. He just occasionally falls that far. Tier 2 is good. It's a really nice group. By ADP, Yainer Diaz goes a little earlier than Adley Rutschman. Salvador Perez isn't too far behind. You mentioned Wilson Contreras moving over to first base. That's a huge deal for his playing time volume, at least the potential playing time volume he'll get this year in St. Louis. You've also got Cal Raleigh, and kind of at the back of the top 100, Will Smith, who I think belongs more in this group than in the next one. You could have probably drew that line in either place.
I kind of draw a line after Contreras there. If you're talking about elite, I mean, if you want to talk about acceptable above average, then you add Raleigh and Smith. You'd start, talking about, hey, we're in a 12-team league. You just put 6 guys in the first tier. You know what I mean? So I think there's really comfortably the top 4, because Cal Raleigh has a batting average flaw, and we'll talk a little bit more of that later. But and Will Smith may not have that, but he's not going to get the big playing time of the top guys. Yainer Diaz, I think, will play some DH in first base.
The Christian Walker signing maybe chips away at some of the first base, but DH floating, I think, in Houston is enough of a floor where playing time is going to come in high for Diaz. He lost a few barrels last year because the ground ball rate ticked up. Is at 51.2% for ground ball rate after 43.2% in his debut. There is a lot of chase. We knew that going in, but there's probably enough hit tool for him to continue getting away with his approach, at least for the next couple of seasons. For his young career, Yainer Diaz is now hitting .291 with a .317 OBP. So OBP leagues, he's among the many players at this position who do get dinged, but a .476 slugging percentage. I think he definitely belongs in this tier. And I think when you run projections and you run auction dollar values, you're going to see numbers that are really similar for at least 3 or 4 players in this group. So you really do have to make your own kind of personal preference list and find ways to break ties, be that maybe supporting cast. And are the Astros a top 5 offense again in 2025? That's where they finished by Team WRC Plus last season. And it looks like Bregman's going to move on because they've got Isaac Paredes there, and they already brought in Christian Walker to help solve their first base situation. Is this Astros team just as good as what we saw a year ago? Or do you think they take a step back and maybe the counting stats for some of the guys we've relied on also come down with it?
Yeah, it's It's interesting. I think they are a little step back. They lost Kyle Tucker and they lost Alex Bregman.
Mm-hmm.
They might have evened it out a little bit, and adding Walker was good, but it's a slight step back. The thing that I love about Diaz is the combination of strikeout rate and batted ball quality. I think that's pretty important because this is a group that doesn't hit for batting average, and he will hit for batting average. That's why I went and took him in my current draft and hold, and in the fourth round, it might have been a mistake because the auction calculator says Wilson Contreras and Salvador Perez are better deals. I was trying to get my first sort of 5 to 10 bats to be not over 30.
Okay, you want the old core. Fair.
I didn't want an old core. I wanted to kind of like 27 to 30. I wanted 25 to 30. I wanted these guys that are in their peaks, didn't have health grade issues. I wanted high floor. And so Diaz was my pick. And you're right. The calculator has them 50 cents apart. So it's not that big of a mistake. But now looking at it and looking at Oopsie, which has come out since I drafted Yainer Diaz, Wilson Contreras is really interesting at first base and DH. Oopsie says he's going to hit 27 homers. He's never done that, so it's fair to be like, well, he's never done that. However, he's never been the first baseman.
Right.
And this may be one of his best years in terms of workload. So it may not take a lot of batted ball quality or swing quality or whatever it is to just be like, hey, what would Wilson Contreras over 650 plate appearances look like? And I kind of think that's really interesting. However, I would have had to just take Wilson Contreras and say, I don't care about the ADP because he wasn't going to get back to me. So there will become a time where you just have to pick one of these top four and go for it. I don't actually include Rutschman there.
You don't think Rutschman belongs in that group? Why's that?
I was left sort of cold with the way the season ended, and looking back, his barrel quality has never been that great. There were some real concerns for me that he's been figured out in some way.
I've been chalking it up to the injury. We talked about it. I think he got hit by a foul tip or hit by a pitch. Can't remember which it was. I know he got hit and his hand, wrist wasn't quite the same from about late June on. Pretty sharp difference in splits for how his season went. And when you look at what Rutschman had put together in 2023, it was a 20 homer season, still got to 19 last year with a good average, 277 over heavy playing time, right? I think Rutschman is maybe the only other catcher who's mostly a catcher, but also DHs just like William Contreras does, where you could say that playing time might actually come in near a max. Like I think there's a way I can talk myself into that happening again. He's still a few years away from free agency. I think the Orioles are going to work him pretty hard in the next couple of years, and maybe he's not getting that long-term extension. Maybe he's not part of the long-term future in Baltimore, even though he's going to be there for these next 3 seasons, barring some kind of trade. So I look at Rutschman. I think this is a really steady profile, and we're probably going to laugh at ourselves for that little bit of a discount that we're getting right now. So I could see if I'm stacking these guys up by position, William Contreras is 1. I think Rutschman comes in at 2 for me. It's not by a wide margin. Again, we're splitting hairs in 50 cents, $1.50 on the auction calculator. But I think I have a little more faith in the Orioles lineup than I do in the Astros lineup. And they did play a good chunk of last year without Kyle Tucker, but I think they will miss him dearly this year because the replacement situation in the outfield doesn't look nearly as good as what they've been able to do so far on the infield corners. Salvador Perez,
he's not gonna give you the plate appearances of the other guys. I don't think.
You really think Rutschman's going to fall short in plate appearances?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that'll be part of their plan for this year to what are you doing in Baltimore right now? You're trying to figure out how not to fall apart at the end of the season like you did last year. Yeah,
and maybe that's more. I don't know though. I think that's what they've done with Adley though. They've built that in. Like they're not falling apart. I guess the other way you could look at it is say compared to Milwaukee, where that list of clearly above average bats is not nearly as long. We've talked so many times about the Orioles having 10 or 11 guys with WRC plus projections above 100. The Brewers don't necessarily have a Heston Kjerstad and a Kobe Mayo and a Jackson Holiday and all these guys that don't have a spot, whereas the Orioles do. So overflow playing time for Rutschman at DH might not be as much of a necessity for the Orioles if those guys are hitting at the levels that are expected. So I guess that could be your best case to say they can back off of him because of their depth, but they haven't done it, and they've had the chance to do it before. So I'm a little higher at Adley Rutschman than you are. Totally fine. We don't have to.
He's
agree.
Also just like, I find him very conventional at the plate in terms of his approach. Like, he doesn't swing at first pitches. He swings at pitches like first pitches 8% of the time. And I think that some of it was exploitable. Anyway, I'm not trying to talk too much crap on him because I think he is a good one. I would just, if I racked it, I would go William Contreras, and having taken Yainer Diaz aside, William Contreras, Willson Contreras for the extra, plate appearance juice. Plus, he's like a 250 to 260 hitter with power. And then I think I'm going to take Yainer Diaz over Salvador Perez. Because of Salvador Perez's age, at some point it has to matter. Even you take away the catcher designation, you take away everything. At some point, you believe a 35-year-old's projection less. And yes, his projection for 260 average and 25, 26, 27 homers is great. But I'm just going to believe it a little bit less given his age and, to be frank, his workload. So I'm going to take Yainer over Salvador by age. And then I think I'm going to take Rutschman there. And I'm willing to put the line that I've got where I want one of these guys behind Rutschman and ahead of Cal Raleigh.
All right. I'm mostly on board with that group being a cut above. I think Raleigh versus Sal, though, is a good toss-up. Maybe Raleigh's the new Sal in some ways. It's just big pop, big dumper. It's the name holds up. He's a catcher averaging 30 homers a year, calling T-Mobile his home park. It's very impressive, and it's elite defense. It's a team that needs as many high-quality bats as they can find, so they have every reason to just keep using Cal Raleigh at an extreme level. It's just as much as he can shoulder, but it's the average is clearly going to be something that can hurt you, and it's going to be over a very large share of playing time, which is it's the thing that actually drags his roto value down, even though the counting stats and the power are very, very reliable.
Yeah, he actually gets a little bit more playing time than usual, but I do have a rant set for this, which is here's a story about batting average and catching. So, I started into this saying, well, catchers don't play as much, and so their batting average doesn't hurt as much. And so I thought I would investigate this belief because it's one that I have ingrained, and every once in a while you have to be like, is that true? And so this part seems to make it true. What I'm looking at is the average PA for the top 10 by the auction calculator in value from last year. So I'm just looking at the top 10 first baseman, top 10 catchers, top 10 second baseman. The top 10 first catchers had 582 plate appearances as an average, right? First base, 653. Second base, 636. Shortstop, 645. Third base, 611. Outfield, 667. First of all, the light should go off a little bit that, playing time is everything, right? It's like, oh, wow, the top guys played a ton. Okay. But on top of that, you see a difference of 30 to almost 80 plate appearances between catchers and the other positions. You look over at the batting average for those top 10 guys, catchers 258, first baseman 270, second baseman 270, shortstops 276. They're the youngest, they're the stars, they're the keystone, right? Third base 264. Those are a little bit the old guys, right? And outfield 277. So, that's just a sort of an idea of like the top guys. So 258 at a catcher, maybe it doesn't hurt as much because you have, only 582 plate appearances. Whereas if you had, Cal Raleigh's projected for a 223 batting average, but I used 230 in my math. So I said, what if you had a 230 outfielder that gave you 700 plate appearances, I used 650. 650 plate appearances of a 230 outfielder has got to hurt a lot more than 580 plate appearances of a 230 catcher, right? That seems unassailable. However, when you start actually doing the math, and what I did was I took all of the plate appearances you have from the rest of your whole team, and I said, if I have a 230, 650 plate appearance player, how much does it take from the rest of my team to get that average up to 258, which is what we said is a target for 15 teams, right? And if I have a 230 catcher that has a 582 plate appearances, how much does it take to get that guy up to get that team up to 258? And guess what the answer is? The same. It's not the same.
It's almost.
It's about the same. You know why? Because it's only 580 out of the 6,500 plate appearances you need for your whole team.
Yeah.
So the difference is 2601 for the catcher and 2603 from the rest of your team for the outfielders. So batting average is batting average, and if you can get it from catcher, you are ahead, and if you don't get it from catcher, you are behind. So Cal Raleigh will affect your batting average, and therefore it is a real negative, and that's why I have him in the next tier. As much as I like him.
So I've thought about this concept before, and it happens more in deeper leagues and in two catcher leagues. And it's me basically saying, if I have a guy like Mike Zunino was one of these players for a long time, he's probably going to hit 215, but he might pop 18 or 20 homers with pretty good run production. He's also not playing every day the way Raleigh does. That's fine. I'm always okay with that because that 218 average over 400 at bats isn't going to hit nearly as hard as it does.
It's still going to
over
hit, though. I think this math says
it hits, but not as bad. And I think the other way I've thought about this, though, is I'd rather just not have bad players. And I find that I can get enough quality at other positions late where having at least one of the catchers that we have in these first couple of tiers, possibly two out of the first three tiers, is a build that I've started to favor a lot more often. I love coming out of a draft. The first draft and hold we did in Arizona, Wilson Contreras and Will Smith.
That's great.
I'm awesome. I have a massive edge in playing time at catcher and skills at catcher with that combination. And I always feel that whatever that cost me, a third SP a little earlier or whatever, there's a cost to it. It doesn't hurt me as much as trying to dig into tier 5 catchers and finding that next catcher and then spending time peppering fab at guys that aren't even playing that much, trying to stream the position. It solves a lot of problems, and I think it even can give you a little bit of a boost in the batting average category if you end up pushing chips in on some of these top end guys that actually do hit for average over heavy volumes of playing time. So the other takeaway real quick is Cal Raleigh's not going to burn you that bad. You just don't put Cal Raleigh on a team that also has Kyle Schwarber and Max Muncy on it if you care about batting average, right? You can have one or two guys like this. You can't have three or four. So you just have to think about the targets you like, how the other positions fit around it, and then decide just how much batting average leak you can take at this position.
And if you're just cool with him costing you, a chance at a fourth or fifth outfielder that does a lot of good things but hits 230, Like, how much do you care about Dalton Varsho or Cedric Mullins or, the types of players that may, not be available to you because you took Cal Raleigh? And maybe it doesn't matter. And there are certainly ways to do that. I just think that he makes you make decisions in ways that the guys before him don't. You know what I mean? Like, he's affecting the rest of your draft in a way that Adley Rutschman won't, I do think Adley Rutschman will at least hit 260 and hit like 15 to 17 homers, I don't know that there's another step. That's why I was kind of denigrating him, but I'm not, I think that's the difference is you start to make decisions when you take Raleigh for the rest of your team. The other thing that sort of popped in my head when you were talking about this is catcher is such a unique position in terms of the defensive value to the teams that they will make decisions about catchers with like information that we don't have access to or that we don't have in the public sphere. Like game calling may be something they decide that they really value out of this player. Like, and then they're just going to be like, we're going to start Martin Maldonado all year because he's an amazing game caller. And we're like, well, we don't have any public stats on that. So how am I supposed to know that Martin Maldonado is going to start all year and you're not going to play this other guy? Remember when we were talking earliest about Yainer Diaz, we said he has trouble with game calling, has some trouble, even speaking the same language. Like he has some like language issues with some of his pitchers, and there's some people saying that he's not actually, that great at prepping. These are all almost like rumor level stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's like, where in the organization did that really come from? And unless you're there every day, how do you know like how bad that problem actually is, and how much of it is comparative analysis? It probably did affect his playing time a little early on, but it doesn't seem to now. So it's like, well, it's hard to parse some of that. So getting earlier, you're getting out of those edge cases. Like we'll talk about this later, but the White Sox catcher trio, there's 3 guys there. How are you going to decide which one is going to start this year? It has to do with options and timelines and who's the better this and who's the better that, right? Like, Corey Lee is the worst catcher of the 3. I'm sure of it. You've got Cuero, the other Cuero, Edgar Cuero. You've got Kyle Teal, and you've got Corey Lee. Corey Lee's definitely the worst offensive catcher, and his defensive numbers were pretty poor last year too. But how are they going to fold those other guys in? And we're left sort of grasping at straws. So in my team, I wanted to have one of those Yainer Diaz, Wilson Contreras, Salvador Perez. I chose Diaz. And the other thing that I've been doing is just trying to get an acceptable second one. So I haven't taken that leap that you've done to get 2 really good ones. And so when we get into these next tiers, we'll start talking about, acceptable second catchers, I think. Got one last thought on this tier. I think Will Smith is actually undervalued by projections. I do see that the Dodgers, maybe because of their perennial deep playoff runs, are more careful with his playing time, but I don't think Austin Barnes is that much of a threat. Dalton Rushing is a little more of a threat because I think Dalton Rushing is a good enough player to just be fine in the lineup. It's going to be a question of how quickly he adjusts. But the reason I like Will Smith, the lineup around him is phenomenal. I think he's still a top 5 catcher, and it's still a lot of barrels too. 10.4% barrel rate on a sub 20% strikeout rate. We talk all the time in this series about lower strikeout rate players maybe lagging a little bit in barrel rate. Will Smith doesn't. I'd see him as a really steady player. He's
awesome. Like if you're in a 10-team league and everyone's like, got catchers like, and Smith is on the board with some other guys, he's an awesome if you get him late,
Right. Catcher 7 or 8 off the board that could still easily be a top 5 guy. Like I will have a lot of Will Smith at this kind of slightly discounted price. I think the categorical balance compared to someone like Raleigh makes him easier to work with. I think I'm with you on the Sal Perez age thing. Like I've been worried about Salvador Perez's cumulative workload just destroying his body and his production for half a decade, thanks to the Ned Yost era. Just like, hey Sal, you're playing catcher every day. Like he has aged so much better than I ever could have imagined. An outlier among outliers, really.
I wonder if the year off when he was hurt was like a boon to him. He did say that coming back off of that, he changed his strategy a little bit at the plate. So
and you might have been some things that are different
career
about him,
changer,
for sure.
Yeah,
but it's another year. I'm like, I'll be a year too early as opposed to a year too late. He burns me every year because I rarely
especially
have
because the
him on
pick
teams.
is pretty high.
Yeah, it's pretty high, pretty consistently. But tier 2, not a bad group of catchers, and you start to see a pretty clear difference once you move down to the next group, going just outside the top 100 overall. Between pick 100 and pick 150, we have Shea Langeliers, Logan O'Hoppe, JT Realmuto, Tyler Stephenson, and Francisco Alvarez. I still like this group. This is why I was saying before, it doesn't have to be 2 from the first 2 tiers. It's probably 2 combined from the first 3 tiers in a 2-catcher league as far as my optimal strategy goes. I think you're still getting either a nice ceiling from guys like Langeliers and Alvarez, really good floor from like a mid-career guy like Stephenson, Or in the case of JT Realmuto, you're getting a guy who was hurt last year, and much like Sal Perez, being old, has that cumulative wear and tear concern, but still has really good foundational skills. JT Realmuto to me is like an older version of Will Smith now. I'm not expecting the bags to come back, but if you told me he could be my second catcher in a 15-team league outside the top 100 overall, I'm fine with that. I think it's going to work. Like, they don't have a good enough backup to take a lot of playing time away from Realmuto. If he's not playing, it's because he's hurt. And that was the case last year. So it was meniscus surgery. Yeah, he turns 34 in March. That kind of wear and tear is going to be more of a concern in these next couple of seasons. But I think you're getting enough of a discount where it's a fair price. Even if you're not pushing him up from where he's going, it's a fair price if you waited a bit at catcher 1, or if you want to go a little early on catcher 2.
Yeah, and he, for what it's worth, like 50 to 60 plate appearances last postseason, and 100 plus less playing time, plate appearance. I should have used fewer. I know I like fewer. I know that fewer is dying, so fewer plate appearances in the postseason and fewer plate appearances in the regular season for Realmuto. So maybe a little bit of a refresher for him. I do like him where he's going. Langeliers, Alvarez. And there's one more.
Hoppy's in this group too.
No, I'm talking about Langeliers and Alvarez being an argument for not necessarily needing to get Raleigh where he's going to, because I believe Langeliers and Alvarez have a similar package of skills.
I agree. I think on the show sheet I wrote big dumper without elite defense for Shea Langeliers. And that's not to say he's a bad defender, but Cal Raleigh's a phenomenal defender. It's been a low average so far as part of the profile for Langeliers. He has improved his strikeout rate.
He's a slightly better strikeout rate than Cal Raleigh.
Mm-hmm. The
slightly worse batted ball quality, I guess. But he also maybe is improving his park effects this year.
That's the thing, is like getting out of the Coliseum into Sacramento helps the entire lineup's offensive profiles a little bit for balls in play. At least that's our expectation going in. Projections say he belongs up a tier, so I think you're doing fine taking Shea Langeliers at his current draft day price. I definitely like him more than O'Hoppe, in part because when I think about catchers, I think about who the backup is and how the backup functions on that roster. And I think they added Travis d'Arnaud to keep Logan O'Hoppe fresh. I mean, I think it's enough to at least bring him down to like second tier volume. And even though the quality of contact is pretty good, we did see the strikeout rate jump up just below 30% last year.
For O'Hoppe, that new strikeout rate actually fits his swinging strike rate better than his old strikeout rate did.
Right. And we saw that 24.1% in the first real season he had with the Angels when he debuted the year before that. That came in like 51 games. So it wasn't even a full season's worth of plate appearances. So I do think the higher 20% K rate might be more what you get. So there's a little bit of batting average risk and a little more playing time risk right now.
I do like him a little bit. He has 3 notebooks. One notebook for his pitchers, one notebook for opposing pitchers, and then one notebook about his own sort of mechanics and what he's thinking about it when he's hitting.
So a very rigorous process. You do like the way he's thinking about things.
I like the way he thinks about it. And I know that he was trained by Jason Ochart when he was with the Phillies to add contact specifically. And that was about sort of playing with contact point. And so I think he's a really cerebral guy, and maybe that and the projections themselves agree that, the strikeout rate will come back down a little bit. And so there's still maybe another level, especially since he's 24. He's one of the few catchers on this list that has, according to aging curves, improvement in front of him. And so I do actually like him. I know the auction calculator says 12th best. I think he's a perfectly acceptable last catcher idea in 12 teamers. And I think he's one of the last guys that I want as my first catcher in 2-catcher leagues and 15-team 2-catcher leagues. I think, if I'm starting with Tyler Stephenson as my number 1 catcher in a 15-team league, Tyler Stephenson is 28. He doesn't have improvement in front of him. And in fact, he has higher strikeout rates in his rearview mirror that could come back, and his batted ball quality is not really as good as O'Hoppe's. And yes, his park is better, but, I don't think he's necessarily got better days in front of him. And so if you're starting with Tyler Stephenson, I think you are basically in you're closer to punting the position. You're closer to being like, I'm just taking cheap guys and just trying to not invest much in the position.
Yeah, I think especially in a one catcher league, that'd be true. In a two catcher league, he might just be more of a second catcher than a potential top 10 guy. I think what you see is pretty steady. The patience gives him a little boost in OBP leagues. I did notice that there's a pretty good split for him at home at Great American Ballpark, as you'd expect. Slugs .470 at home the last 3 years, .376 on the road. You have to wonder, is the first base and DH depth chart there still soft enough to keep him in the lineup when he's not catching? Because they brought in Jose Trevino, who's there for his glove. He's not there to hit. He's there because he's a good catcher and can handle the staff really well. So I do think there's a little bit of playing time risk for Stephenson. Belongs in this tier for me, but he's last of the tier for sure. I would choose all four other guys over him, hands down. I think there's two things that are challenging for me. One is that Francisco Alvarez is the cheapest of the bunch, and I actually might like him straight up more than everybody else. Like O'Hoppe, he's young. He had the torn UCL in his left hand from falling while running the bases. Fluke injury cost him 7 weeks last year. But he popped 25 homers in 423 plate appearances.
Yeah.
I think he's going to strike out less than Raleigh. So I think he's less batting average risk. The quality of the contact is great.
It's similar to Raleigh's. I know the barrel rate wasn't necessarily there in 2024, but I believe he might be able to barrel at that sort of 12 to 15% level.
And he was
with the max EV around 115. Yeah.
He's always been young for the level in the minors and smoked the ball coming through the Mets system. The defense has come along at a really high level. I mean, look at their depth chart. Luis Torrens and Luis de los Santos are the backup. So if you're looking for the guy that could play a ton and have massive skills growth, I think Alvarez ticks both of those boxes. Whereas, the age of Realmuto gives you a little bit of risk. O'Hoppe having Darno there holds him back a little bit on max playing time. Like Shea Langeliers versus Alvarez is an ADP toss-up for me, and there's a 40 to 50 pick gap between them. And I like Shea too, but I think I might like Alvarez even more. The problem is like waiting just long enough to not take him too early, and then not fall into the trap of having to go later at catcher, because I think it gets really pretty dicey after this group.
Yeah. Alvarez is really intriguing for a number of reasons, least of which is that he is projected by Oopsie to be a top 10 catcher, ninth, with a 488 plate appearance number. That doesn't make much sense to me given his age. I mean, Gabriel Moreno, 5'14", Shea Langeliers, 5'06". So, I think you could give him, without saying, oh, he's going to play DH and this and that. I think you can just give him, hey, he's our young catcher that catches, like plate appearances. And if you do that, you can get him to 5'10", 5'20". And if you do that, I think he's going to move past Realmuto in these projections and get close to Langeliers and Rutschman and have the lowest, the highest ADP of those. I don't know. How do you say that? Lowest or highest? Be the lowest. It'd be the latest pick of the three. Whatever. I
always think ADP high would be like early and low is late. That's how my brain is calibrated that way. If I'm getting it wrong, please let me know.
I do want to give some love to the 10th best projected catcher. Gabriel Moreno. And I guess that's in the next tier, but he's projected to be the 10th best. And, one of the things that catchers are really bad at is not striking out. And Moreno is pretty decent when it comes to that, although he's not showing up. What is this? This must be second half or something. Did he strike out more in the second half? Did he strike out more in general? He's got a 14.8. Was he hurt last year?
Yeah, he only played 97 games. Yeah, he was hurt.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he has a 14.8% strike rate. If you look at, this is second half up here, but second half that would have been Keibert Ruiz has the lowest. Miguel Amaya has second lowest. Alejandro Kirk, who I have as my second catcher, partially because he's a great defender and he doesn't strike out, is there. And then it would be Adley, Rutschman, and Gabriel Moreno next. So, having a good strikeout rate like that and there's a minimum level of batted ball quality separates you from Keibert Ruiz a little bit. And once you have a minimal level of batted ball quality and the ability to strike out, you're probably not going to have a bad batting average. You're probably going to have a better batting average than the rest of the catchers. And so that's my speech for Gabriel Moreno is good defense, good enough batted ball quality, and great strikeout rate. He's everything that I wanted Keibert Ruiz to be.
Yeah, I think just the career OBP, it's 347 for Moreno right now, and that's being really young for a big league catcher. He's going to turn 25 next month in February, so it's like he could still get better. If he doesn't, because of his glove, he plays a lot, so you max out his playing time, and maybe it's 9 to 11 homers with okay run production, but a batting average that actually helps you, that tends to work out all right. I do think of this trio in this group, which also includes Austin Wells and Keibert Ruiz, I do like Moreno the most, but I don't know. Like we could be waiting longer. Sometimes catchers' bats take a little longer to actually come through. And the injuries for Moreno is 2 different injuries that cost him time. I was looking at the RotoWire Outlook just a moment ago. It's a sprained thumb and then an adductor strain. End of the season looked pretty good, and I think the OBP skills are solid. So it's kind of like instead of Tyler Stephenson, I'd rather just have Moreno a little cheaper. That's probably the way I look at him. He's not necessarily a target, but I do think there's a world in which the bigger power guys that I like a little bit more go, or maybe I was trying to wait too long on Francisco Alvarez and the tier gets wiped out and now I got to have a backup plan. Moreno would at least be on the backup plan list, even if he's not necessarily a must-have or like my favorite sleeper at the position, because that's Alvarez. Alvarez, he's not even a sleeper. He's just the guy that I really want to have on my roster if I can, as long as anything close to that current price holds up. What do you think of Austin Wells? We talked a lot about him in the playoff shows and down the stretch last year because he was in a prominent spot for the Yankees lineup at various points last year. I think he hit cleanup a good bit. He's got a career 9.9% barrel rate through about 500 plate appearances. Defense has come along really well. And I mentioned Jose Trevino before. He's gone. He's in Cincinnati now. So this could be a pretty high volume opportunity for Austin Wells as a left-handed power bat, especially. That fits really well in Yankee Stadium. Do you think we get another step forward from Wells this year?
I think just getting a full season will be great because Austin Wells in the second half last year had the sixth best barrel rate behind Logan O'Hoppe, Cal Raleigh, Yasmani Grandal, but in very small 107 plate appearances, so you could leave him out. William Contreras, Salvador Perez, and in that top 10 for barrel rate in the second half, he had the second best strikeout rate. So if you kind of look across the board, he looks like a Sal Perez with walks.
That's a good profile. Perez with walks, without walks. So
yeah. So I mean, I really like Austin Wells, and I like him so much more than Keibert Ruiz, and that is who you have in this tier, huh? That must be a projections thing. I mean, he just really hasn't done it yet. Austin Wells, has shown us in-game power, has shown us process power, great, barrel rates, great strikeout rates. I mean, he's a breakout candidate. And in fact, in some ways, I like him better than Francisco Alvarez because he doesn't have that sort of, how much is he going to strike out component to him.
How dare you, sir? No, disagreement is fine. Healthy. Keibert Ruiz is in this group by ADP. I think the reason he's there, if you run Steamer instead of Oopsie into the auction calculator, Keibert Ruiz comes out as the 13th catcher. Yeah. And that kind of puts the extra weight on there. And look, they signed him to an extension. They don't have exciting backups in DC.
Oh, he's going to play.
The lineup's getting better, but he's been a frustrating player for us for a long time because we've always wondered if the quality of contact would ever improve to the point of being even close to average. And he doesn't strike out, so I know that drags down the hard-hitting barrel, but it's more than it should.
Yeah, it's 1,500 plate appearances now with a 4% barrel rate, and really a lot of that's floated in 2023. He looks like a guy who's going to barrel 3% of the time. It's not going to be, I'm surprised there's 15 homer projections for him. Oopsie has a 12, and, I wouldn't be surprised if he hit 11 homers this year and stole one bag. So I just think it's a pretty empty line. And if you look at the auction calculator around him, Alejandro Kirk is, similar in the amount of contact he makes, but his career barrel rate is 6.8%. He had a 6.7 last year. The projections are lighter for him on power, and that doesn't make sense to me.
I think the projections on Kirk's playing time are kind of off in my estimation too.
He's easily the best catcher there.
Yeah, like they just cleaned it up. Like the depth chart was crowded for a long time, but over the years it's just changed, right? Danny Jansen's
the one
gone.
that remains.
Tyler Heineman is, I think, a pretty clear backup. Am I missing anything? He's 33. Like why would Tyler Heineman take more than the occasional starts? I think,
and Kirk even at DH right now,
time-wise.
The top guy on DH right now is Will Wagner, who's 26, and he did have a 125 WRC plus last year, but Oopsie has a 93 WRC plus for him going forward, and he profiles a little bit. I thought he was more of a kind of a utility guy for them. I mean, he's played all over the diamond for Houston, and I don't think that's somebody you necessarily throw in at DH. Now Springer could go there because he's old as dirt, and Wagner and other guys can play the outfield. But if you actually think about it, I need to do this right now. I'm going to do this right now. Oopsie, Blue Jays. I'm just looking at the projections for the Blue Jays, and I'm sorting by WRC plus. And Alejandro Kirk is the third best bat on the Toronto
both systems
Blue Jays.
like him. I mean, he's got basically the same projection from Steamer and Oopsie. Like there's projections agreement already about
I'll give him some
what
DH.
He is.
Yeah. I'll give him some DH. And that 436 plate appearances seemed low. So I was pretty happy to get him really late. I got him just as an example for people. I got him in the 20th round of my draft and hold.
Yeah. It's strange to think that when he came in, the questions were like, is he a good enough catcher to catch a lot? And now he's grading out as a really good defensive catcher. Really, each of the last 3 seasons, he's been at least good, but the last 2, he's been great. And it was all like bat forward stuff before. It was like, oh, he might just DH. He hits the ball so hard. He said back-to-back seasons where Alejandro Kirk has had a sub 360 slugging percentage. It's weird. But now I think let's Frankenstein this together. Let's say it keeps the defensive improvements. Maybe he gets back to hitting the ball much like he did in 2022. And that ends up being a huge value where he's going, because Alejandro Kirk isn't even in tier 5. Tier 5 is a group of players going between pick 200 and 250 that includes Sean Murphy, Iván Herrera, Connor Wong, Ryan Jeffers, and Joey Bart.
Yeah, why would you take Keibert Ruiz ahead of these guys if Alejandro Kirk is there 100 picks later?
Why would you take Joey Bart over Alejandro Kirk? There are 3.
I don't understand that either.
Hazel's even like upset about this. She's like, I want more treats. Why are you talking about the Pirates?
I kind of have a favorite in here.
Who do you like?
Think you could pick my favorite?
You probably like Herrera.
No, yeah, that's my second favorite. Sean Murphy.
Okay, well, Sean Murphy was a safe answer.
Yeah, Sean Murphy in the second half was just behind Austin Wells in barrels. And I know he hit 177 along with it and struck out 25.5% of the time. But the barrels coming back for Murphy says to me that there's a chance that, he's getting healthy. I know he's 30, but he's not 35. I mean, we're talking about Sal Perez and stuff. So the projections for 233 and 16 to 19 homers, the projections from Oopsie are better, so the bat speed is there. You can see his max EV is good. Barrel rates in the past were higher, so having a second half barrel rate that looked a little bit more like his barrel rates in the past. So I think he's just basically getting over injury, and he might return to that 250 20 homer level that he was at just in 2023. So I like Sean Murphy a lot, actually, where he's going. I had a difficult discussion with myself where I had him for like $10 in auto-new and a 5x5 auto-new. And, none of the projections say he's worth keeping, but I was like, he might go for close to this in the auction. He might be worth something like this next year because there's definitely bounce back potential for Sean Murphy.
I know the prospect community is pretty optimistic about Drake Baldwin and what he brings as a hitter. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot for him to learn at AAA, so you could at least see Baldwin working as a backup. Murphy's got a big contract. We've seen Atlanta go through seasons. This is one of the spots where they don't overplay guys. They actually share the workload. I mentioned William Contreras this brief time there a little earlier, and maybe they can coexist and both be really good. And maybe that's a good thing for Sean Murphy at a certain point. Like the balance between playing too much as a catcher and playing too little is a fine line to walk. And I just wonder if Murphy's kind of in that sweet spot age-wise where Baldwin's presence would actually kind of level out, where the per game numbers would be really good. They pick their spots really carefully with him when they do sit him, and it could be the best of all worlds even if he's not going to be a workhorse again, even if Sean Murphy's not going to clock in with top 5 or even top 10 plate appearances at the position. I think you're right to still like his skills, because I think Murphy looks like a pretty good bargain in this range. Do you think Iván Herrera is the clear starter over Pedro Pages? Do you think it's more of a timeshare? Because Herrera's skills, which we've talked about a little bit this winter, are very interesting. So it comes down to just how you think the Cardinals are going to divvy up the playing time.
Yeah, I think there's just demonstrated excellence in the last 2 seasons combined. Herrera's had a 126 WRC plus to Pedro Pages' 83, and there are some things that you can like for Pages under the hood in terms of he's hit the ball interesting, hard, like a little bit hard, and he doesn't strike out that much. But everything that he does, Iván Herrera does better, honestly. Strikeout rate goes to Iván Herrera. Max EV goes to Iván Herrera by almost 3 miles an hour. Average EV to Iván Herrera by almost a mile an hour. Barrel rate almost twice as many to Iván Herrera. Hard hit 44 to 40%. So I just think it would take a real assessment of the defense that I haven't seen yet to say that Pedro Pages is going to start. Now, maybe I'm missing something, and in St. Louis, they've been talking about how much better Pedro is defensively. That could affect things. They did, they famously have a Hall of Famer, Yadier Molina, that was there for defense than for his offense. So, and they almost ran William Contreras out of town for his defense. So, if I'm missing something there, please tell me in the Discord or somewhere. But just in terms of defensive metrics that I can look at, I don't see a difference.
Yeah, remember the time the Cardinals signed William Contreras to a 5-year deal, and like Memorial Day weekend of year 1, he wasn't a catcher anymore?
Yeah, and it's fine. It's so silly it's fine. Like, he can be a good first baseman on that deal and still make it worth it.
But yeah, that was a Paul Goldschmidt overlap, so that wasn't an option. And then I think DH was a little crowded. Anyway, just a fun time where that was like, how does this get out this early?
I don't like Wong and Bart, just kind of across the board. I was looking at, problems that contenders had, and I was really surprised at first to see that the Red Sox had problems at catcher and short. But when I investigated a little bit further, I kind of understood it. Wong is one of the worst framers in the sport. And not a great blocker. So he's a pretty bad defensive catcher. And then last year he had a sort of offensive explosion that I don't think really lines up with his metrics. A real improvement in strikeout rate despite a mediocre swinging strike rate. So, and a long history of striking out more. So I think the strikeout rate's going to go right back up. And then, a near league average home run or sort of isolated power, despite a 6% barrel rate and a 109 max EV. And then this like kind of 8 steal level, which is like non-zero steals. And you could say that that's a boon, but at 28 years old, surprising age, it's hard to say that he's going to keep continuing to do that. And really 8 steals could go either way. You could do it again, or you could go down to 3. And so I hesitate to give him, all of his steals he's projected for. I hesitate to give him the 250 average he's projected for, because I think there's a chance the strikeout rate goes up to 27, 28. So, I just generally, I'm not a big fan of this profile. And when you look at things like WAR and you say, oh my gosh, projected WAR, and you say, oh, this is a problem, and you have people talking about it in Boston, you realize that maybe he's not considered sort of the catcher of the future with the big capital C and the capital F.
Even with Kyle Teal getting traded to the White Sox, though, or you just look at this and go, oh, maybe there's one more year of Wong being most of the guy. I think they brought in Carlos Narvaez in a small trade. He hasn't played in the big leagues, other than like 6 games with the Yankees. Just kind of looks more like
better
a backup.
defensive guy. Yeah, but he's not good enough offensively to just give him the job, probably.
Right. Like he did some interesting things at AAA, but also like nothing guaranteed as far as like being an upgrade over Connor Wong. So I think Wong is just sort of okay, like kind of in a cheaper Keibert Ruiz sort of way. Probably the guy again for another year, but what he did last season is probably not sustainable to a full level. It's going to be a little bit of a step back from him. Ryan Jeffers goes in this tier, did pretty well with 465 plate appearances, even though he shares the role. I was just wondering if the Twins are really trying to keep costs down. If they find a taker for Christian Vasquez and even just a portion of his salary, maybe Jeffers has a path to even larger role, but I wouldn't project him for more until that happens. Did pop 21 homers, came with a low average, which isn't usually part of the equation. Also leads to a question, though, like when you play in a timeshare and you get the increased role, you might not be as effective, right? Because in a timeshare, you're getting spotted in the matchups that make the most sense. As a 3/4 share playing time guy, maybe you got to deal with some more tough matchups to plate. Therefore, the numbers come down a little bit. I liked Ryan Jeffers a lot prior to last season. I think he's fine as a catcher, too, because he's going to give you some cheap power, even if he is sharing the job the same way he did last year.
You know, he is 27. There's a chance that you can Frankenstein a better year than he's ever had, where you take, this past season's 20% strikeout rate, which I think honestly looks okay next to some of his swing strike rates. He's had 9% swing strike rates. Last year, at 10.6%. Like, that's a pretty decent swing strike rate. So, let's give him, like a 21, 22% strikeout rate. That's still better than league average, would be one of the best among catchers. And then give him some of his old barrel rates. Last year was an 8.3% barrel rate, where he had 11s and 12s and 14s before. So, you could give him some of those things together. And, looking at 27, given he's a catcher, a 27, 28-year-old, that's totally in the peak range. So there is a chance here where you kind of get a 260, 22, like a Will Smith light, honestly. So he's another guy I like in this tier.
One thing I would point out, though, with Ryan Jeffers, and even with most of his career sharing the role prior to last season, he crushes lefties. 133 WRC plus, career 258, 340, 492 line against lefties, a 95 against same-handed pitching, with a 27% K rate. So 218, 296, 398. It's a 95 WRC plus against righties. So long term, there could be some concerns there, but they don't seem like they've got the next long-term starter knocking on the door, even though they were the team that ended up getting Diego Cartaya. I think his shortcomings were pretty well documented after the Dodgers sent him packing in the last couple of weeks.
By the way, behind the scenes, I think this is now 3 episodes in a row. The producer Brian has written the Cardinal way in the private chat. I think he's trolling you.
He is, and I appreciate Brian Smith for producing this episode and every episode he produced. And I will continue to ignore it. What you guys
you'll get him back somehow.
I think I've been able to keep my left hand off camera, which is helpful because I have a bag of dog treats that people can't see on YouTube. My dog wants to go outside again. She went outside before the show. She's fine. She's taken care of. But the treats, every minute or two, I have to grab another treat and hold it, give her a couple pets, and then throw the treat under the bed. And she runs over and eats the treat, and she comes back for another one. We have about 30 more minutes of show to go. I've got plenty of treats. I'm not going to run out. But it's calming me down, like petting. Like I see the Cardinal way on the screen, and I just give her a couple pets on the ear, and I'm good. It's not rattling me today.
I'm not gonna get mad.
If Hazel's not in the room, then yeah, it'll bring up the blood pressure. I should have the Apple Watch or something on and look. And every time I read the Cardinal way, I bet it goes up a little bit. It's got to be bad for my health.
Joey Bart deserves a little bit of discussion. He did improve his swing strike rate, so his strikeout rate improvements may be real. He did get it down 10.5%. I just said that was pretty good. He has had way worse in the past. He had his first year with big playing time in San Francisco. He had 16.9% swinging strike rate. So, that's a really big difference. So if he, reduces his batted ball quality a little bit, reduces his pull rate a little bit, and improves his strikeout rate, and has something like he did last year, he will be the obvious lone catcher there. I do want to point out, though, that Pittsburgh has Henry Davis, Andy Rodriguez, and Jason DeLay. And the only reason I mention Jason DeLay is because he is similar to Bart, as in someone they sort of picked up from another organization. And I do think that they're still, even as much as teams try to look at every player and see their range of outcomes and not bring any baggage to it, you are going to, on some level, remember Andy Rodriguez coming up through the system and know that if Andy Rodriguez, becomes a full-time starter in the big leagues and is an above-average bat, he will be the first above-average bat that you've developed in your system.
He'll be the first one.
Yeah, I'm talking about like this front office.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It's a tough road.
Don't you think like Henry Davis and Andy Rodriguez get like a chance at being
100%?
And there's like Joey Bart is like the new monkey in the monkey sphere. He's there and he's good, but like he's the newest guy. So if he struggles, if he strikes out 30% of the time in spring training, and Andy's looking good, or Henry Davis is hitting the snot out of the ball, let me put it this way: there's enough risk that Joey Bart is not the number one catcher that he should not go here.
Right. The fact that Alejandro Kirk, we talked about earlier, goes the next tier is shocking. The best guess that I have for how this is going to work.
Could Billy Cook's catch?
Billy Cook doesn't catch. I don't know how he impacts this situation, other than to say, because Billy Cook's an outfielder first baseman by designation, that he does impact the situation in a weird way, because Billy Cook impacts everything in fantasy baseball. Because we're not going to give Joey Bart first base at bat. No, but Henry Davis is probably more of an outfielder than a catcher. And, just figuring out how all the pieces fit at other spots is sort of key. I think you give players like Davis and Rodriguez long opportunities because your supporting cast is non-existent or written in pencil, right? So you could have the most optimistic views of O'Neal Cruz, Brian Reynolds, Nick Gonzalez, Brian Hayes, and Spencer Horwitz. That's 5. You need 4 more guys that can hit at least close to average levels. So there's a world, and I'm sure this is a possibility. I don't know how likely it is, but there is a world in which Bart, Davis, and Andy Rodriguez could actually all be in the starting lineup together. Andy Rodriguez, I think, was going to play some second base before
they were
his lost season.
Over.
They're going to play him. He's kind of interested in playing all over, but he's good enough to catch. There's a world in which Andy Rodriguez is the starting catcher against righties. Bart is the starter against lefties. And then Rodriguez plays other positions when Bart's starting. And Henry Davis is in the corner. And if he just hits, he's going to play. And if he doesn't, he's not. So
I took Davis as my third catcher in this league because I got behind it a little bit. But I was happy that I got Kirk as my second. And, these leagues, you're always plugging holes. So I just thought Henry Davis, there is playing. I agree with you. We talked about this a little bit, and I think there's some playing time possibility. But it also does reduce maybe the chance that any one of them gets, 490 plate appearances.
Yeah, I guess it does if it's less than it would elsewhere because of their willingness to play those guys out of position, which we've already seen.
Right.
And their need. They're flat need for more hitters. They can better than most situations where you look at 3 possible catchers, including Colorado. I mean, the Rockies situation.
I haven't looked at this at all.
The Rockies situation goes beyond tier 6. We'll get there in a second. But right, it's the Hunter Goodman situation because they've got Jacob Stallings, who they brought back, veteran, good glove, had a nice season there last year, but he's like on the wrong side of 35 now. So how long is that going to last? Drew Romo, a guy that the organization has a lot invested in, he could be the primary catcher. And then there's Goodman, who does amazing things power-wise in the minors, has done amazing things power-wise in the minors, and is listed in the LF, RF, and first base trees over at Fangraphs. Yeah, right. Like any number of things are possible there. And Goodman did it power-wise, just with a low average in half a season with the Rockies last year. Hits the ball hard, barrels it up, but has strikeout concerns. I guess what I'm saying is when you're looking for the catchers who might not catch that have big power and you're thinking about Goodman because he plays in Colorado and he's a little younger than some of the other guys that they are trying to fit into various corners of that depth chart, I'm okay with Goodman as a flyer. If I'm okay with Goodman as a flyer, I should be really excited about Henry Davis later because Henry Davis also beats up on pitching in the upper levels of the minor leagues. If you gave Henry Davis full seasons at AA and AAA, I bet they'd look a lot like Hunter Goodman's power output. So I think injuries have complicated things a little bit for Henry Davis, and I realize that where he was drafted makes him someone that we probably have higher expectations for or unfair expectations for. But if you trust upper level production, there's still something to like there. That's all I have on Davis as still maybe being useful. Pulling it back into the order of things, though, this group's not that bad. Tier 6, pick 250 to 300. We talked about Kirk before. We like him. Bo Naylor has at least some things you could talk yourself into. I think he's, by projection, like Connor Wong with a lower average, but I trust Naylor's scouting reports and skills a lot more than Wong, so I'd rather draft Bo Naylor than Connor Wong straight up, and getting a discount makes me more excited about Naylor. He's firmly a catcher, too. He's a watch list guy in a league where only have to start one catcher.
Younger than Wong, so there's like a chance of improvement. The chance of improvement is higher, I believe.
Absolutely. I think he's going to start getting to some more power. I think that's a possibility. He runs a little bit, so there's still things to like about Bo Naylor. Patrick Bailey, man, he's such a good defender. The only concern I'm starting to have with Bailey is it's multiple concussions now, I think, that have cost him time. Mm-hmm. So there's the long-term health questions, right? It's just avoiding the foul tips and the things that cause you to miss a lot of time. And each concussion is just, me, it's more of a problem than the last one. And the cumulative effects of that they go beyond your baseball career. If you could tell me that Patrick Bailey is going to stay healthy, I think he could actually be among the league leaders in playing time behind the plate. And I think we saw a little bit of growth from him as a hitter, too. So I actually like Bailey just fine as a catcher, too. If I'm doing the thing where I got one really good catcher and I end up having to wait until these late rounds to get a catcher, too, I actually think Bailey does just enough to at least meet the level we need as a probably fringe top 20 guy at the position.
Yeah. And what I like with Baylor, Kirk, and Naylor that is not true of Heim is that I think they're very clearly the first catchers, and if they're healthy, they play. And that's their deal. Jonah Heim is kind of interesting because in some ways he's offensively superior to Kyle Higashioka, who they brought in. And Fangraphs has it like basically a 50-50 split because it's really hard to figure out who's going to, I think on some level it's hard to figure out who Jonah Heim's going to be. But in general, you can say you give strikeout rate to Jonah Heim over Higashioka. That's been demonstrated over their whole careers. And though you give barrel rate to Higashioka over Heim, there have been years where, like 2023, Heim got to an 8%. It's not bad. And in terms of max EVs, there have been years where Heim has been better than Higashioka. So there is some bat speed in there for Heim. And I think with that strikeout rate, his offensive ceiling might actually be better than Higashioka's. And then his defensive numbers are through the roof. I mean, before last year. And what I'd heard even in Oakland was that people love throwing to him. So, and so you have that, but that's also been listed as a positive for Higashioka, So I think this is just a really, really tough one to figure out. I think there could be a guy who gets to 500 plate appearances and is a decent second catcher. I'm just not exactly sure which one's going to be.
I think it probably would ride more on injury. I think they're going to come closer to an even split. Maybe you'll see the occasional DH opportunity for Higashioka where they're both in the lineup together. That's probably not the default thing they want to do, but something they would do once in a while. And yeah, it's going to come down to health. So I think the things I said about Patrick Bailey are largely true about Heim. You mentioned the slip in defense,
except
or at least
for
last year.
Like the bad last year, basically.
But they were good comps until Higashioka got there, and now I think I clearly prefer Bailey, and Heim's probably someone I'm just stepping away from because there's a few late options that might make
Heim's
a little
switch
bit more
hitter,
sense.
which is just like, you're kind of like, oh man, that could work.
A switch hitting catcher who's shown, I mean, geez, he drove in 95 runs, 18 homers just over a year ago now with like good underlying numbers too.
Yeah.
I was surprised when they were the team that spent the money on Kyle Higashioka, not because he's bad, because it seems like money's a little tight for them right now. And that didn't seem like as much of a need as, one more high quality reliever, but that was just my opinion from the outside.
Yeah. We made some cases for some late guys that we like in Henry Davis and maybe Hunter Goodman. I've made cases for Luis Camposano in the past, but it is a little bit contingent on them not doing anything more in San Diego to address the catcher position. Yasmani Grandal still out there, and it's not impossible to see them signing him and Grandal actually being kind of the bulk starter, or at least a 50-50 split that kind of ruins both of their values. But Luis Camposano does make good contact and hits the ball super hard. He has not turned it into barrels. He has not really turned it into great on-field success, but right now he's probably the starting catcher, and there is some portion of breakout potential, 10-15% breakout potential, which is more than you can say for a lot of the older guys down there. I think Danny Jansen going to Tampa Bay, where he's a pull fly ball guy. They love pull fly ball guys. He's coming off of one of his worst years, but he did have a 3-year stretch of kind of like a 230 batting average and 15 homers every year. He's a great mono league catcher, I think, and could rise to second catcher level in 15 teamers, especially if they kind of if there's a good marriage between Park and player. I don't actually know what it looks like down the line there. It would have been better for him in the Trop if he could pull it down the line a la Paredes. But I do think it's an okay offensive Park. He's not going to encounter the fact that the Trop used to make pitchers stuff better. There's a stuff plus Park factor there. So, it may be a decent year for Danny to get Danny Jansen. It'll be cheap.
There's a chance he plays more than ever. I mean, think about that crowded situation we were just talking about in Toronto. Like, he was one of the guys that was there with Alejandro Kirk, and I think the max we ever saw was a 384 plate appearance season way back in 2019. It wasn't great. He hit 207 with a 279 OBP, did pop 13 homers, but I think he's become a better hitter over time because that was his first full season in the big leagues. I wonder if the Rays saw him and said, we can give this guy 450 plate appearances and maybe he'll quietly hit 20 homers. Like, I do think Danny Jansen is a little bit of an oatmeal-y sleeper type where he's going at this point. I'd take him over Heim. I think he's going to play just as much as Jonah Heim and maybe even a little more because of the factors we just talked about. What about the Cubs situation? I think that's one of the more interesting ones that we haven't even brought up at any point yet, because you got Miguel Amaya, who did some pretty interesting things in the second half last year, Carson Kelly, the veteran backup they brought in, and then a prospect that we saw in the fall league in Moises Ballesteros. Do you see anybody in that trio that you like as a clear-cut number one catcher for the Cubs who will provide enough value for us this year to break through at least in 2 catcher leagues, even if we don't necessarily see a top 10 player at the position within that group?
Things tend to go slowly for young catchers. We know that their debut date is on average later than it is for other positions. Their offensive peak can be a year later than other positions. And so Miguel Amaya at 25, I think there's probably still enough in terms of organizational momentum to feel like this is our catcher of the future. He has been showing strides. He has improved his strikeout rate greatly. He has, showed good top end exit velos, just needs to show a little bit more in-game power. His offensive projection is better than Carson Kelly's, and he's going to know all the pitchers. So he's going to have an advantage in the spring in terms of all the sort of incumbent Cubs pitchers. He's going to have a relationship with them. So I think Miguel Amaya is pretty much the clear favorite. Carson Kelly is going to slide into a sort of a backup portion of his career. Even though he's a kind of a high end backup at this point at 30, I think that those offensive projections are only going to go down going forward, and he'll be the sort of Oopsie has an 89 WRC projection for him, and I think next year year it'll be like a 78, and he'll be firmly ensconced as a backup. They signed him to a 2-year deal, so I think this is Moises Ballesteros' real timeline is sometime next year. I mean, if you do want him to catch, you can keep him in AAA longer than you would just a bat of his quality. And so either we'll find that he's playing other positions this year and that increases his timeline and gets him to the major leagues quicker, or he's staying at catcher and really he's a 2026 kind of guy.
Yeah.
2026.
I've got him in Ottoneu as a possible cheap keeper, and I think I'm throwing Ballesteros back just because it's a little too crowded. Amaya's good enough, and Kelly's not useless as a part-time guy, at least on the small side of a platoon. I think Amaya's also a righty, but that's how Kelly has traditionally been used. He starts against lefties because he crushes them. So part of a timeshare there. I think they just added Martin Maldonado in San Diego. I don't think that really takes a lot of value away from Campusano. It's still a pretty wide open depth chart, especially for guys that.
Although they could just go defense first, And
it's a possibility
because his defense is so bad. But that does give him a spring to kind of be like, hey, if I'm hot, I can get this job back.
I know some people like Adrian Del Castillo, hit for a lot of power at AAA Reno, hits for power really everywhere in that Arizona
Moreno
system.
Is ensconced, dude.
Right. I don't know if there's enough time at other spots that would really make him useful. I think it would take a Moreno injury for Del Castillo to be a redraft target for me. Dalton Rushing, probably more of like a backup on a good team, so more of an NL only keeper dynasty sort of play for me for the time being, because I can't really see how else he would play. You talked about Davison De Los Santos in Miami and the first base opportunity. Augustin Ramirez also there, a catcher option for them. I mean, Nick Fortes is just a guy. Do you think Ramirez could actually be
Fortes
a little bit
does
of a
have plus bat speed, but he has not turned it into anything. So yeah, I think he's just a guy.
Right.
This could be something there. I also think it's more exciting to talk about the White Sox, trio because, if Kyle Teal makes it, he has, I think the offensive upside to really contribute. But, I don't mind Edgar Guerrero either, because Guerrero, strikes out less than Teal and could give you, just enough power and better strikeout rates. So he could be interesting offensively too, but they also have the incumbent Corey Lee. Carroll was on the taxi squad last year, late last year. He's been with the organization longer. Teal is a year older, and he comes in as, the big part of a big deal, like on some level there may be hey, I know we traded Garrett Crochet, but this is what we got out of it,
Right.
And so I guess I give Teal the nudge for, if one of the two is going to be the starting catcher for the White Sox by, July, it's Teal. So that's interesting. That's interesting enough to make him pick up in some leagues.
I think the timeline on those guys is so similar because they've got a partial season at AAA each, and if you're the White Sox, you could develop them both simultaneously. Corey Lee has options; he can option.
But you
him
can't.
Out.
You can't. I mean, someone has to be at AAA, and someone has to be in the major leagues.
Who are you DHing if you're the White Sox? Why not just have both catchers up? Have them learning with your big league coaches, working with your staff.
So have all three catchers in the major leagues?
No, option Corey Lee. Just have Caro and Teal up.
Interesting.
That's what I would do. And play them both in the lineup.
I kind of think it'll be Corey and Teal, Corey Lee and Teal in the major leagues, and Carrero starting catching every day.
Yeah, they got Matt Diaz on the depth chart too to muddy things up even further.
Thighs of steel.
Are you looking for any bounce back out of Mitch Garver? Catcher eligible.
Man, I was staring a hole into him for this draft that I'm in, and I don't know. Yes, but they've got two guys there at DH in Mitch Haniger and him. Both of them are projected to bounce back. Both are in their 30s. Both, and you have this stupid thing with Garver where he's good every other year.
So super reliable.
So throw that in the mix.
Bank on that.
But the strikeout rate increase in Seattle. I don't know if Garver's just going to figure that out in his second year in Seattle at 34 years old. So if he's going to strike out 30% of the time, then he's just a pretty boring bat. And then you'd be buying him for playing time, but he's also vying for playing time with Mitch Haniger at DH. So it's not even clear that he would like become the overall DH. I mean, he got 430 plate appearances last year with an 88 WRC plus. Like he really has to make his case to even maybe make this roster.
Why'd Mitch Haniger? Like, why is Mitch Haniger still there? Mitch
They had to
Haniger's
trade
34
him
now.
to get the Robbie Ray money off the books.
What a weird team, man. Like what?
They've got, I have a feeling they have this like one hard cap ass number and everything has to like be under that. And that informs all their moves.
I think you're at the point with Haniger and Garver where you could just release either one or both if you don't want them on your roster anymore, and they could probably end up with part-time roles somewhere else. And I think with a reset in a different park, but we might in deep enough leagues be interested in both of them again. But I don't like them coexisting, trying to share that spot as the DH in Seattle. David Fry's coming off of elbow surgery, so his timetable makes it a little complicated.
I couldn't even keep him in Autonew as like a $3 guy just because, I'm going to have this guy sitting on my roster for like 2 months at least, maybe 2.5 months doing nothing. And I'm going to need the money in free agency at some point. I'm going to drop Fry to get that buck back in free agency. And it's a really hard case to kind of make to nurse a guy through 2 months of nothing.
Yeah, that's probably not the way you want to handle it in most situations. Like if super late in a draft and hold, you could do okay, but I'm not really excited about it, even though what he was doing last year was pretty fun. Last situation before we get to a few prospects, Jake Rogers. I was checking in with the Discord, asking people to watch the Tigers every day. Like, what's your vibe on Rogers versus Dingler? Knowing Rogers is a great defender, is there enough room for Dylan Dingler to just kind of come in and end up taking a larger share of playing time? Because Dingler's another guy that's had pretty good success in the upper levels of the minors, has some power. I think he's got a more interesting offensive profile than Rogers does. The consensus was Rogers' defense is just so good, Hinch loves him, that it's probably not going to be a thing that swings all the way to Dylan Dingler being the starter, especially in 2025, if it ever happens at all.
Yeah, I think Rogers is ensconced, and he's just so boring offensively that if you take him, it's in draft and hold to be your third or fourth catcher. And honestly, it may be a net negative to put him in your lineup. Like you have to think about it. Like he might hit 206 and what's like 206 with a homer every other week is that something you really want in your lineup?
It's cold, but I think that's about right as far as expectations go. Other prospects, the only one we really haven't hit yet, I guess Drew Romo didn't really come up with the Rocky stuff earlier, and then Samuel Basallo, yet another Oriole. And
I just generally not denigrate necessarily, but just I don't really support catching prospects. Like they have to make it. They have to prove so much to their major league team that they can do this. They can call a game. They can handle the staff. They can block pitches. They can frame pitches, and they can hit, and it just generally takes them a long time to prove that to a major league coaching staff, I think.
Yeah, I know they've played him a little bit at first base in the minors, but I think since he hasn't played a ton at AAA yet, I think that's where Basallo spends.
He did come up in our Matt
year.
Shaw comps.
Yeah, no, I think as a
he's
hitter,
a pretty
he's
good bat. Maybe
he's going to be a good hitter.
First, yeah.
I think on that depth chart, it's so crowded right now. It's really hard to see him getting regular run now. I think it's a year from now where we're really looking at him for redraft purposes, barring some kind of massive trade.
Big piece in a trade.
Yeah, that's where I think it would change really quickly. Just a name to consider if that were to happen, or you had enough space to actually stash him. Colorado situation. Do you think there's actually a good catcher there? Do you think it's Goodman? Do you think it's Romo, or do you think it's an easy avoid?
Nothing in Colorado is an easy avoid, but 23-year-old Romo with good strikeout rates in the minors that did not do well in his first shot, but probably the prospects reports has a 50 field. by Fangraphs. Yeah, he has a chance. He's a plus glove by Eric Longenhagen's estimation, and a plus arm, but likely won't make a huge offensive impact. But I mean, projected for a 20% strikeout rate and hitting in Coors, like, yeah, that's an interesting guy to me. I think it's a little bit more interesting than I like Goodman. The vibe I get when somebody is moved around a lot like that is that they don't think he's actually a great defensive catcher.
No, but hopefully
Goodman's you're like, you hope you have him when he's playing somewhere else and has catcher eligibility. Romo's more like, this guy could maybe be the catcher going forward.
Like, can you hit enough to just take a spot from a guy like Sam Hilliard? But then you're also taking a spot from someone like Jordan Beck, who's young and kind of interesting in his own right too. So yeah, does he fit into the outfield mix, or does he have a better start than Michael Tolia? Like, there's a lot of questions for Goodman to actually get that time, even though I understand why people are interested. I've got him in one league already. It might be the only Hunter Goodman team I have. Drew Romo, here's my parting thought. 28.1% hard hit rate from Fangraphs at AAA last year. That was in 85 games. So yeah, the questions about his bat are very real, despite the fact that it came in a little above league average. And yeah, he popped 14 homers, but that was the PCL, man. You got to be real careful with that. So probably a group of players at that catcher position that I'll mostly avoid, other than that one Hunter Goodman dart that I threw a few weeks back. I think we made it through catchers. There's a good chance someone slipped through the cracks, and that's happened at other
never
positions.
Go back.
Never go back to catchers. Other than a few cutting room floor names that may come in at a future date, we've got that. Be sure to join the Discord, though. Submit your rankings. The Hive rankings are live. We'll have a link to the catchers in the show description and in the Discord. You can find us on Blue Sky. Eno's at enosaris.bsky.social. I'm dvr.bsky.social. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks to Brian Smith for producing this episode, even though he's been trolling me in the background throughout the episode.